Good morning.
Good morning.
Happy Easter.
Happy Easter.
So the story we just heard perhaps was not the Easter story you were expecting, not the same level of enthusiasm you just showed. Mark's gospel does not give us the fanfare we have been experiencing in the music and the lessons in this liturgy, or the joyful messages found in other gospels. Mark does quite the opposite. He leaves us hanging with questions, unsettled. The ending of Mark has been controversial from the beginning, so much so that a second ending was tacked on near the end of the 2nd century to Markan manuscripts, and then a third ending added 2 centuries later that mirrors the other Gospels with an appearance by Jesus in the garden and a more immediate understanding and sharing of the resurrection news by his disciples. The original ending of Mark that we just heard is stark, it's jarring, and it's supposed to be. Mark is doing what he has done throughout his gospel. He tells us about Jesus and calls us to respond today, right now. We are not to be passive listeners to this story. And it can be so tempting to sing our alleluias and hunt for Easter eggs and get cascarones in our hair, to head off to brunch and eat our candy. Hopefully only the candy with solid chocolate bunny ears, and to miss the invitation that is before us, an invitation to respond to the good news that Mark offers, an invitation that will lead us to transformation through the power of Jesus' resurrection. In today's gospel, we meet the same women who had been at the foot of the cross on Good Friday, and they are heading to Jesus' tomb. Keep in mind that they witnessed up close the brutality of Jesus' unjust murder. And it happened at the hands of their religious leaders and the Roman Empire. And these women saw the disciples who had followed Jesus for 3 years abandon him. They knew what Jesus preached, that he would rise again. But given the finality of his death, the response of everyone around him, it likely seemed very impossible to believe that to be true. And perhaps we can relate to their desolation at times in our own lives when we have experienced life-changing loss or witnessed again and again the ravages of poverty and war in the larger world, or the ravages of addiction, dissension, and discord closer to home. It can feel impossible to believe that there could be another way. It can be hard to find hope. I imagine the women coming to Jesus' tomb were in a fog of despair, going through the motions to do the only thing they could to honor Jesus one last time by anointing his body. Imagine their shock, seeing that the tomb was open, that the stone had been rolled away, and a messenger of God telling them he is raised, he is not here, and he has gone ahead to Galilee. After the absolute devastation, after the trauma that they witnessed and experienced, what did that mean for them? To see the empty tomb, to hear those words, to consider that Jesus was not bound by the violent death that was put upon him. And what does that mean for us, the empty tomb? To hear those words, to consider that Jesus is not bound by death. We have heard iterations of the Easter story so many times it can lose its meaning. But Mark does not allow for that. He brings us right into the story, describing the responses of the women, the most faithful witnesses to Jesus. And he describes their responses as terror and amazement seizing them. And then they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. Terror, amazement, and fear make total sense. The women could not wrap their heads around Jesus' death and resurrection. It must have felt like whiplash. And yet 2,000 years later, I'm not sure that we can so easily wrap our heads around it either. The empty tomb and the angel's announcement is something we need to continue to sit with and ponder, which is why we have 50 days of Easter to celebrate and unpack what the resurrection means. What does it mean that our God was willing to become one of us and become powerless and die a terrible death, an embarrassing death on the cross? What does it mean that God is bigger than the desolation and despair, the betrayals and the losses, the broken hearts and broken bodies in a broken world, that through Jesus there might be wholeness, there will be wholeness and healing and new life available? What does it mean for us that Jesus goes before us, preparing a way that we cannot see, and will conquer what seems unconquerable to us? And another question: when was the last time you have been seized by terror and amazement, and even been afraid that good news could be true? Maybe it was when you got the dream job or into the college of your choice. Or maybe it was when you made the team or got a part in the play. Maybe it was when you were found cancer-free after months of grueling treatments. Or maybe it was learning that you were going to be a parent or a grandparent for the first time. When the hopes of hope in your life were on the cusp of being realized. Knowing that if these hopes were in fact realized, life as you knew it would be changing, and changing dramatically. And you would necessarily have to change with it. And as we all know, change can be scary. Change can be terrifying, even if it is good. And I wonder if this is a little of what the women in Mark's gospel may also have been experiencing in their fear. That if what they had been told by Jesus and now the angel was true, their lives were about to change irrevocably, even more so than when Jesus was alive, because now anything was possible. So what will we do with this news? The news that through the death and resurrection of Jesus, the destructive forces in our lives and our world, that those will never have the last word. That nothing is impossible for our God who loves us so much, our God who so loved the world that he gave his only Son so that we might have life and live it abundantly. What will we do with this news? Will we share it? Will we follow Jesus to Galilee, whatever that might look like for us? Will we allow our lives to be transformed by the reality of the resurrection, giving ourselves over to his way of life in the shadow of the cross? Maybe we could do with a little more amazement on this Easter day, and maybe a little less chocolate. It could be both and, but maybe we should be a little afraid. For if our God can do this, can rise above the power and violence and destruction and death, then we can have hope that we and our world can be transformed even in the most desolate places. And what's more, we can participate, we're called to participate in that transformation with Jesus, who is going ahead of us, who is preparing the way, which will mean that we will have to change, that we will not be in control, not that we ever were, and that we will continue to be changed and changed irrevocably. Mark puts us right alongside the women at the tomb today, bringing our sadness and struggles and despair, bringing our triumphs and our hopes, our dreams, our limits, and our desire for control. And we are invited, along with the women, to see and to respond to what they have found and to hear the words of the angel. Do not be alarmed. He is raised. He is not here. He is going ahead of you. What will you do? Happy Easter.